What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Katson's Corner, the show where we talk about the Chargers draft potential all season long. We are going to do something a little bit different this week and talk about how the Chargers might attack the first few rounds of this draft. I mean, something that a couple of you guys have asked me in the Discord this week, especially after making that trade for Odafe Owe, where edge rushers maybe not as much of a need for the Chargers, especially early on in the draft with Owe and Thule and Khalil Mack now on the roster. There's a lot of moving parts there that we'll get into a little bit, but really just wanted to kind of take this time where, we're 5 weeks into the season now. We kind of know what the strengths and weaknesses of this team are, obviously injuries notwithstanding. And so we're starting to get a better idea of what the Chargers actually need come April. So we have 6 positions that I've kind of put together as like something that the Chargers might spend a fairly early round pick on. We're defining early round as day 1 or day 2 pick here. So we're going to get into that in just a second. Obviously, before we do all the YouTube stuff, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know every time Steven, Tyler, Alex, and I are going live or post a video or what have you. We'll go ahead and get started. So the way that I did this is basically we're going to go through 6 position groups that I think are a potential day 2 or day 1 pick for the Chargers as of right now with what they have on the team. And we're going to go in kind of order of priority here, as I've defined it. I think that there's some buckets that you can put it in. It's more of a tier list kind of thing right now where I think multiple positions are probably of roughly equivalent priority depending on, who's going to be on the board and everything. But there's still a lot of college football left to be played. There's still a lot of NFL football left to be played. So a lot of those positions and how they might group together in the draft is going to change a lot. So right now we're just going to kind of focus on like, here's a couple positions where I think the Chargers might spend a pick in the first 3 rounds. And here are some players that I think kind of fit those molds and fit what the Chargers are looking for the most part, as we've gotten through like the first almost half of the season for college football and the first quarter of the season for the Chargers. So we're going to start obviously with the interior offensive line. We talked about this last week. 3 of the 4 guys that are on this slide we talked about on last week's episode as well. So if you want more in-depth breakdowns on Lalolu, Ioane, or Connor Liu, you can go to last week's episode and watch that. But I think that this is naturally the first spot that people are going to gravitate towards, especially with the way that the offensive line as a whole has performed this season. Zion Johnson is a free agent after the year. Obviously, Bradley Bozeman has struggled a little bit. Tyler and Steven did a great job of covering that the other day. And so there's going to be some shuffling on the offensive line. Mekhi Becton is obviously going to be a cornerstone piece for them going forward. I do think that there's an argument to be made through 5 weeks of the season that Zion has played well enough that he has earned a contract extension from the Chargers. Not necessarily like a super big money contract extension, but a contract extension as like this is an average to maybe slightly above average starter on the offensive line. The Chargers kind of need to take what they can get in that position room specifically. And so maybe guard kind of falls down the list of priorities, and it's really just about finding the center of the future on this team. But I could also see the argument for, it's 1 year that Zion has performed well. Maybe we play the comp pick game with him a little bit. I know that a lot of people are not necessarily super confident that the Chargers are going to get a comp pick because of how much cap space they have going into this free agency. But you could at least play the game a little bit, see if someone else throws some big money at him, see if he qualifies for maybe like a 3rd or 4th round comp pick that you may be able to get to count just based on the way that you structure some of the other contracts that you sign in free agency. But I think right now guard is maybe a little bit lower of a priority. I did have Ioane and Texas A&M's Chase Basantis on here as kind of the 2 guys that I think make sense in that range. Ioane is more like if you're going to let Zion hit free agency and you want a guy to start at left guard next season, I think Ioane makes a lot of sense for that. We talked about that last week in terms of, he plays in a relatively gap-heavy scheme for college. He's played left guard. He's played all over the line. He's probably going to end up as guard 1 based on the trajectory of all those guys right now. Obviously, a lot of things could change before then. But right now, he looks like the best guard in the class. If the Chargers are going to be picking in the 20s, that's kind of where you start to get the first guard, like pure guard, not the first like tackle you're going to shift to guard, but the first like guy that played guard in college. And so Ioane kind of like fits like where they might be picking and what the need might be. Basantis is more of like the day two type that could maybe play either side. Maybe as a depth piece for the first year or 2 years that he's on the team, and then kind of takes over in a starting role maybe after Mekhi Becton's contract runs out at right guard or something like that. But before then, just sort of provides depth. Because again, keep in mind that like Jamari Sawyer is a free agent after the season, Trey Pipkins is a free agent after the season, so you're losing a lot of depth on the interior as well that needs to be built back up. And so taking a guy, as we've seen this season, right? Like you're going to get down to that seventh, eighth, ninth offensive lineman on the roster. Taking guys pretty relatively early on in order to bolster that depth is a good idea. We'll talk about that more a little bit later too. But at center, obviously, the crucial thing here is finding a starter for the future. Bradley Bozeman has not performed well. I think we all know that. We all know, we've gone through many times the frustrations with the way that the front office has handled the center position specifically. There's not a true like future guy on the roster currently. Andre James is a veteran also. As much as you like Josh Kaltenberger, maybe like he's not your starting center of the future. He's on the practice squad right now after not being on the practice squad last week. And so it's pretty clear how the Chargers feel about him. And so whether you want to go Lalolu or Connor Lew, I think either one of those guys makes sense right now as kind of like a day one starter type. I do think that Lew is more of a back end of the first rounder type. Lalolu might be somebody you can get in the second round, day two, like second, third round, day two range. It depends on how he plays the rest of the season. Oregon still has a lot of tests on that schedule left. And obviously, as we get into the playoff and everything as well, they'll see a lot more tests there. And so it'll be interesting to see how he kind of continues to perform, because if he continues to perform the way he did against Penn State, then I think that we're talking about a player that, could be as high as top 50. If it kind of like levels out a little bit and we get a little bit more of a like, okay, this is more of a gonna be like more of a gap scheme type center because he is so densely built and he's not really like a great necessarily athlete out in space for more like zone type schemes, then maybe his value gets pushed down a little bit just because there are a lot more teams that run zone. And so there's not going to be some people that like want to put him in their scheme as much as some other teams like the Chargers might want to. And so maybe that'll limit his draft ceiling a little bit. But anyway you shake it, I think interior offensive line is pretty clearly the number one need on this team now for the future. And again, maybe one of those spots gets filled by Zion. I hope it does. He's been playing really well. Just for the Chargers' sake, I hope that he continues to play well and is rewarded with that extension. I don't have as many priors about him as some other people do. I just want the players to play well and for the players that play well to be rewarded with commensurate value. I don't care who it is. So it's not about Zion specifically necessarily, but he's been playing well to start the season. I want him to continue playing well. I want the Chargers to have a functional starting left guard. So maybe one of those spots gets filled by him, and maybe it doesn't. Maybe it gets filled by one of these guys. Moving on, I think the number two need on this team, future, if you're looking at multiple years down the line, right, is corner. And the reason I say that is because if you look at the way that the cornerback room is constructed currently, Benjamin St-Juste is the fourth corner on the Chargers roster, but he's still playing about 25% of the snaps this season. And some of that has to do with Tarheeb Still has been a little bit banged up. Cam Hart, I think, missed one game. He's been banged up. Dante Jackson even has been a little bit banged up. But really, Jackson and Still are playing like the bulk of the snaps. Cam Hart is playing, I think, around like 50, 60% of the snaps right now. And then Benjamin St-Juste is still playing a quarter of the snaps. He's still on the field last week against the Commanders when all four corners are healthy, right? And so clearly the Chargers want there to be a little bit more of a rotation at that spot. They don't necessarily want guys to be 100% snap starters every single game. Maybe that has to do with the personnel that they have currently. Maybe that just has to do with the way that they want to run the defense. It kind of depends. It's hard to tell because this is the personnel that they've had for both seasons in LA so far, right? And so either way, right, Benjamin St-Juste is on a one-year contract. Dante Jackson is on a 2-year contract, but he's also older, right? And so you're going to need somebody to step into that role that Jackson is playing after the 2026 season, assuming that he doesn't, continue at the level that he's continuing at because he's going to be in his early 30s by the time that happens, right? Tarheeb Still and Cam Hart are under cost-controlled rookie contracts, obviously both fifth-round picks, so that cost is even a little bit more controlled. But if you want to grab somebody that you think is going to be the CB1, right? Like CB1 type talent, or even is going to be a CB2 type talent behind Still, who's played very well, right? Then I think that you need to spend a higher pick on one of these guys. I get that the Chargers have done a great job finding value on day 3, especially at corner with Still and Hart. But if you take a corner day 2, or even day 1, right? But like, let's talk mostly about day 2 here. I think if you take a corner on day 2, that guy is still going to have a role for you right away as corner 4, assuming that Benjamin St-Juste is not re-signed, right? And that guy is still, again, playing a quarter of the snaps right now. And so you can kind of bring him along a little bit slower. You can have him develop a little bit. And then after 2026, when Dante Jackson hits free agency, you already have an in-house replacement that can elevate in that role that has already played snaps in the defense. One of those guys that I really like is San Diego State's Chris Johnson. I think that this guy's a top 50 player. Trevor Sikkema over at PFF snuck him into his top 50, and then their updated big boards that they did over on NFL Stock Exchange this week. I've been really impressed with the way that he's played to start this season. I have a lot of friends that really like him. I think he's going to be a top 50, top 75 guy when things are all said and done. He's played really well this season and also is in the Chargers' backyard, obviously at SDSU. Keith Abney is another guy that I have a lot of scouting friends that really like Keith Abney that have been on him for, since the summer. Former speed skater. And so, like, you can tell in the way that he moves. He's a very fluid mover. It's really impressive to watch the way that he mirrors routes and is able to flip his hips and change direction. I really like the way that he plays. I think he would be a nice fit in this defense. Xavier Scott is a guy who's been injured this season, and so maybe you can kind of get him in the 3rd round when maybe he is a little bit more of a 2nd-round talent. But he's really playing. It's a different defense, Illinois is, than when they had Devon Witherspoon, but he's playing a pretty similar role to what Devon Witherspoon did at Illinois, where he's playing a lot in the slot, but he's still playing like 30-40% of his snaps on the outside. He's done that for the last 2 or 3 years. It's another piece you can kind of move around. I think for the Chargers specifically, that probably fits what they want to do, just because like then you have him and Steele that can both kind of bounce between inside and outside. So he's somebody that I think is worth watching. And then Colton Hood at Tennessee has had a really great season to start this year. Obviously, he's stepped up into a little bit more of a CB1 role for the Volunteers because Jermod McCoy has been injured. A lot of people think Jermod McCoy is the best corner in this draft class. I think that he's someone that's we're going to be talking about as like a top 10, top 15 pick if and when he comes back this season. But Hood has been really good in his own right. Transferred in from Colorado. He's only a redshirt sophomore, so there's a chance that he doesn't declare. But with the way that he's playing right now, I think that I'm comfortable putting him in the day 2 range. Another guy that I think fits the Chargers pretty well in terms of like the way that he plays, or the way he has played through 5 games of what I've caught of him so far. And so another guy to kind of keep an eye on. But I think that corner is definitely something where I'm interested in spending a day 2 pick on it here, both because like that guy is still going to play for you, right? To start his rookie season. And then also you're going to have an in-house replacement after 2026 when Dante Jackson hits free agency. Okay, we're going to move to running back. Obviously, this kind of takes on a little bit more of an emphasis because of the situation that the Chargers are in currently with the running back room, where Hassan Haskins and Kamani Vidal are the top 2 guys on Sunday against the Dolphins. Marion Hampton has looked great. This is not anything about the way that Marion Hampton has played as the first-round pick this season. Najee Harris obviously tore his Achilles. He's only on a 1-year contract, and so Harris, Haskins. I think Haskins is a free agent after this season too, and obviously Vidal getting brought back up. I can't talk this segment. Getting brought back up from the practice squad this week. All those guys are on 1-year deals, and so there's not anybody under contract unless Haskins has a second year of his contract. I can't recall right now, but even so, right? Like At maximum, the most that you have behind Demarion Hampton going into next season is Hassan Haskins on the second year of what I would assume is a 2-year contract. That's not going to cut it. It's just not. And we can see already that it's not going to cut it because Haskins and Vidal are going to be the top two guys on Sunday. And that's not an inspiring place to be in. Greg Roman has said that they want this offense to be more of a committee. I am curious how much more of a committee we would have seen if Najee had stayed healthy, if Hampton had stayed healthy. Obviously, now he's injured, right? But if both those guys were healthy, I am curious how much of a committee it would be and how much they do commit to that. And I think that the way that they attack the running back position in this draft class will be really illustrative of how much of a committee they actually want that to be. Because Hampton is a true all-around running back. He can give you the angry runs out of the backfield. He got the scepter in week 4. But he's also a really good receiver out of the backfield. He's done really well at that as a rookie. I think that there's a very clear value for that there. He's done very well in pass protection. That was one of the highlights of him coming out of the draft. And so, like, there's not really a reason that you need to take him off the field other than just give him a second, give him a few snaps to recover, right? Like, have a change of pace. And so if they do that, I think that spending a day 2 pick again makes some sense for them, because if they want to commit to more of like a 70-30 split, even rather than like an 85-15 split where Hampton is taking the bulk of all of the snaps, right? I think something like what you've seen from the Rams with the way that they've used Kyron Williams and Blake Corum this season, where they're getting a little bit closer to a 70-30 split as Blake Corum gets a little bit more comfortable in the NFL. I think my inclination is that that's more where the Chargers want to get to with this running back room. But they can't right now because obviously Najee missed all the camp and now he tore his Achilles. And then like Haskins and Vidal are just like not the same caliber of back that you want as a change of pace guy. So I think that might be something where it's like, it's not necessarily a need because Marion Hampton has played very well. Maybe they just sign a veteran for cheap like they did with Najee. But I also think that in terms of cost control, you can just take another guy day 2 and just roll with him. The Seahawks did this with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. Now both of those guys are getting plenty of touches in the Seahawks offense, right? So if you want to add some explosiveness, Justice Haynes is your guy. He has a really good chance to end up as RB2 in this draft class. Personally, my RB2 right now is Jonah Coleman, who plays at Washington, who some of you guys know. I cover that team, so I have a fondness for Jonah Coleman. He's done a really great job reshaping his body this season. But Justice Haynes has the most explosive runs in college football of any player in the country right now. He had his 40-yard run streak snapped this past week, but still had a run of I think 27 or 28. Has still been like a very, very, very explosive player for Michigan. Transferred in from Alabama. He was a really high recruit. Like everything about this guy is an NFL player. He doesn't have the same Michigan ties as some other prospects because he just got to Michigan this season. So Jim Harbaugh never coached him or anything. I'm not putting him on this list for that reason. But if you want to add some explosiveness, I think that's the guy there. Jadarian Price and Katron Allen are both part of committees currently. They're kind of the second guy in the committee in college. Price is behind Jeremiah Love, who's going to be the runaway RB1 in this draft class. Allen is behind Nicholas Singleton, who that's been a committee that they've run for the last few years. I think Allen has played better this season than Singleton has. Allen looks a little bit more explosive. He looks a little bit more he looks like he's taking care of his body a little bit this offseason. So I'm interested to see how he tests because his testing before this season, I would have told you he's probably like a 4.6, 4.7 guy, which is not great, but also for an RB2 in the league, I don't think is terrible either. Price has been really good behind Love. I've been really impressed with him. He might come back. He has, I think, at least one more year, maybe 2 more. So he might come back and want to be the lead guy after Love leaves. But if he does come out, I think he's a day 2 guy. And then Hollywood Smothers at NC State, another young guy. But he's really been a breakout star for NC State this season. I think that like if you want to add some explosiveness, if you want to add some if you want to double down on the archetype that Hampton is, Smothers has broken a ton of tackles this season. He has a ton of yards after contact. I think he's like 3rd or 4th in the country in yards after contact this season. And so if you want to double down on that archetype and just add another guy who can hammer you, kind of the way that they tried to with Hampton and Harris this year, then I think Smothers makes a lot of sense too. But there's a lot of different flavors you can go with at running back, obviously. Like I said, there's not really a reason right now why you need to take a Marion Hampton off the field other than just to get him some rest. And I think that the Chargers want to do a little bit more of that than they were before Hampton got injured. So I do think running back is something that they could consider on day two. Moving to defensive tackle, I know that this is one that a lot of people have brought up of like, oh, well, now that they traded for an edge, I think defensive tackle is their round one pick. And I get the compulsion to do that. But I also think that the way that the Chargers defense has operated at defensive tackle the last 2 years has shown that they don't need that player right now. Also, the way that Tier Tart is playing through 5 weeks, I don't think you need a top 32 pick at defensive tackle right now because Tier Tart is playing incredibly well. I think you should just extend him after this season. He's on a 1-year contract. It's going to expire at the end of this year, but I really think you should just give him a new deal. And if you do that, then you have Tier Tart and you have Jamari Caldwell already locked up. And that's your kind of pure nose tackle type in Caldwell, and then a guy that can play nose or three tech in Tart. And that's kind of your Tier Tart Puna Ford rotation from last season. So you don't really need a guy that can play like 0-1 tech at that point. And that's why some of these guys are not on this list. Some of these defensive tackles you might have heard of, like a guy like Dominique Orange at Ohio State, at Iowa State, because that's really more of like a traditional nose tackle type. And I think the Chargers are already set at that spot. What I'm looking for out of a defensive tackle is pass rush at this point, because I do think that there's still some more juice that they could get out of that room in terms of attacking the quarterback. And if you're going to do that, I think that Kayden McDonald makes a lot of sense. He's a rotational guy at Ohio State that has taken a step forward this season, took a step forward in the playoff as well as kind of a backup guy. I think he's played really well to start the year. Zane Durant is my friend James Foster, who works with me at Wide Left and does some work kind of here and there, does a lot of really great draft work. But he's compared Zane Durant to Shelby Harris. And if you think about the player that Shelby Harris was in his prime in Denver, that's like exactly the type of player that the Chargers need on the interior defensive line right now, of like a slashing three technique type that is mostly going to be rushing the passer, but can still defend the run a little bit. Durant has struggled against the run a touch this year, got dominated by Lalolu in that Oregon Penn State game a little bit in the run game. But in terms of like getting after the passer, I'm not sure you can find a better guy than Zane Durant at the defensive tackle spot this season. Skylar Gill Howard is another guy, kind of can play 3-5 tech. Texas Tech has kicked him outside a couple of times this season. 6'1", 290, so he's like a little bit of a weird body type. But another guy where I think like if you're trying to get after the passer, he makes a lot of sense. And then Christian Miller at Georgia, I think has played his way into like the end of the first round, top of the second round conversation through 6 weeks so far. Obviously have to see how the rest of the schedule shapes up. Georgia especially, right? Like any of those SEC Big Ten teams, all of their tests are backloaded in the back half of the season. But Miller is a guy where Georgia's defensive line asks you to play the run first. And so if you have a high pressure rate, pass rush win rate at Georgia, that means that you are like a high-end pass rusher. And Miller has that. And so I think if you're looking for pass rush specifically, Miller is a great option at that point. I just don't know if the value is going to match up with the need for Miller specifically, because I think we're going to get to a point where like someone is going to spend a top 40, 50 pick on Miller if he plays the way that he has to start this season. And I just don't know if the Chargers need to spend a top 40 or 50 pick on the defensive line, because again, Tier Tart has played extremely well. Jamar Caldwell has looked good in flashes. I think you're going to see some moves in free agency at that spot because defensive tackles hit free agency at a higher clip than some of these other positions. And so I think that the room is going to look a lot different next year because there's so many guys on expiring deals. But I think with Tart back, with Caldwell back in his second season, like it's not as much of a need as I've seen some other people saying. Still a need, still something I'm interested in spending a pick in the first 2 days on, just like not a huge need to me. Offensive tackle. Okay. So if you look at the way that the best offensive line units in the league have built their lines, you look at the Eagles, you look at the Packers, you look at the Cowboys. The commonality between all of those teams is that they just keep throwing picks at it. They just keep doing it. The Packers took Anthony Belton in the second round this year, knowing that he was not going to play unless somebody got injured at offensive tackle. They have Zach Tom, they have Rasheed Walker, Elton Jenkins can kick out to tackle. They have like a billion tackles on this roster. They have Jordan Morgan that they took in the first round a couple years ago. Like there's millions of tackles on the Packers roster. And they took Anthony Belton anyway in the second round. And guess what? He had to play this season because the Packers are also decimated on the offensive line. But you haven't heard the national media talking about how terrible the Packers offensive line is because they've already invested all of this stuff into the offensive line to prepare for this exact scenario that the Chargers are currently in. Obviously, when you get down to your fourth, fifth, sixth option at tackle, like the Chargers might be down to on Sunday, like you're going to start to see diminishing returns. But when you're only down to like your third, fourth, fifth guy, like there's still some potential for you to like have an NFL caliber player on the roster to do that. Obviously, the Chargers have Trey Pipkins. He's on an expiring contract. Their fourth tackle is not an NFL caliber player right now. Like Austin Deculus has not been an NFL caliber player, and that's their fourth offensive tackle. The Packers' fourth offensive tackle is Anthony Belton, who they took in the second round this season. Like I keep emphasizing this, but like that is the way that successful offensive line units have built their offensive line in the NFL. And so I think even if you're bullish on the way that Rashawn Slater is going to come back from this patellar tendon injury, Joe Alt is obviously going to be back from this ankle sprain sooner rather than later. I think even if you're really, really set on Slater and Alt are going to be the two tackles on this Chargers team for the next 5-10 years, right? I want to believe that that's true. And I truly believe that that's true. I think that the patellar tendon injury is something that we've seen guys come back for stronger and stronger every single year. Alt looks like a great, great, great player, no matter which side you put him on. I'm not at all concerned about the way that he's going to hold up. But the reality is, every single season, you're going to get guys that are injured on the offensive line. And you have to build more depth. You have to have a functional swing tackle. And that guy can't cost $10 million the way that Trey Pipkins almost does, right? And so, you look at a guy like Austin Barber, who's run a lot of gap stuff at Florida and graded out really well in that sense, but I think has some very glaring flaws to his game, right? That's a day two pick that you take as a swing tackle. And like, if you take an offensive tackle in the third round and he does not play for the 4 seasons of his rookie contract, but he's a quality swing tackle that maybe plays like 100 snaps in 4 seasons, that is a victory. Like I get that like that doesn't seem like it's like the best use of a third round pick. That is a victory. That's all I want out of a third round offensive tackle. That's perfect. Because you know what that means? The offensive line stayed healthy all 4 years that guy was on the roster. And like that's great luck. And if he has to play 500 snaps, if he has to start for the better half of a season, better half of 2 seasons or something, and he's like, okay, isn't that better than what the Chargers have right now? And so, like, yes, super flawed player. I think Barber has really struggled this season, especially with some of these SEC opponents. But like, he's a good gap run blocker. He's a decent pass protector. He's like okay in pass protection. I think that there's something to work with there. And like maybe he never plays. That's great. That's awesome. Kayden Green, another guy where he's played left tackle, left guard, right guard, like he can play all over. And so like that's a perfect swing guy. I don't know if he comes out this season because he's only a junior, but you can see like team captain, you can see the C on his chest there. So this is a guy again where I think like you can have him kind of be the Pipkins like he's going to be the swing tackle, but he can also kick inside to guard. And so it gives us depth in multiple positions there. Brian Parker is very similar in that way. He plays right tackle for Duke right now. He's played left tackle before. A lot of people think he's going to end up at center. And so, kind of sneaking another center option in there for you guys. But a lot of people think that he could move around. So maybe he ends up more of an interior guy. We have to see, once he gets in the building and everything. And then Blake Miller is mostly a right tackle, but it's a lot easier to move right tackles inside than left tackles, just because of the way that your game profiles typically at right tackle. It's a little bit different, every year, but, in college, left and right tackle is still a little bit more of separate positions where left tackle is your best pass protector and right tackle is your best run blocker. And so typically the traits at right tackle tend to translate a little bit better to playing on the inside. And so, Blake Miller is another guy where I think you take him day 2, maybe you can test him inside a little bit. He's your 6th offensive lineman as a swing guy. Because again, remember, Sawyer is a free agent after the season too. So you just have to throw picks at this problem. And I get that doesn't, like, it's not exciting because you want day 2 picks on the field, right? You want those guys to be making immediate impacts right away. But again, like taking a guy in the 3rd round and just like, he's our 6th offensive lineman. We hope he does not play. And if he plays, we're confident that he will be like a league average player. That is the spot that you want to be in. And the way that you get to that spot is by taking an offensive tackle on day 2, even though you already have 2 all-pro caliber tackles on the roster. Period. Okay, we've gone over time. I'm sorry, Steven, but we're going to talk about edge rusher because I do think that there is still a scenario in which edge rusher is a need for this Chargers team. But I think if that scenario happens, you're taking an edge rusher in the 1st round. Because that scenario is Odafe Owe is on his 5th-year option, and so he is a free agent after the season. The Chargers have the money to re-sign him. But also, Owe is effectively now on a however many games are left, 11-week tryout, right? If he plays well, which I hope he does, I think he will. If he plays well, the Chargers should just extend him. I get that, like, it's going to be a big money contract. Someone's going to give him a bag in free agency. Maybe you can get a 3rd-round comp pick out of him. They should just extend it. They have the money to extend him. They already made the trade to extend him. They've already invested resources into acquiring Odafe Owe. If he plays well, you should just re-sign that player. Because Khalil Mack is also a free agent after the season. And we don't really know what that looks like, right? Maybe Mack wants to go to more of an immediate contending team. I don't think that's the case, but maybe things change, right? Things can always change. Things change very fast, especially in the NFL. But also there's a consideration to be made of, like, is this Khalil Mack's last season? I don't think so necessarily, but it could be, right? And so in either one of those cases, right, like, I think you have to re-sign Odafe Owe if he wants to come back. Because you're either setting yourself up for, okay, in 2026, our edge duo is still Khalil Mack and Tuli Tuipulotu, but Odafe Owe is our 3rd edge rusher. And then in 2027, our edge rusher duo is Tuli and Owe. Or Khalil Mack goes somewhere else and you say in 2026, our edge duo is Tuli and Owe. The only scenario in which I think the Chargers need to take an edge rusher early on in the draft, now that they've traded for Odafe Owe, is Khalil Mack leaves, whether that's retirement or free agency, and Odafe Owe also leaves because he either doesn't play well for these 11 weeks or the Chargers don't meet his salary demands or whatever happens, right? Because at that point, you have Tuli Tuipulotu and nothing else. And that's why they made this trade in the first place. And if that happens, you have to take an edge rusher in the 1st round. It's the only way that you are getting out of this problem. Even if Khalil Mack is still on the team, but Odafe Owe signed somewhere else in free agency this offseason, I think you still have to take an edge rusher early because Khalil Mack's time in the NFL is running out. And I hate to say that because he's one of my favorite players in the league, but that is the reality of time, right? Like, we're running out of time with Khalil Mack in an NFL uniform. And so you have to prepare for that, right? And I think if you're going to prepare for that, you have to spend a very, very early pick on it because you're preparing for a guy to take over as the edge 1, or at the very least, the edge 1B behind Tuli Tuipulotu, who, by the way, also needs a contract extension if he's going to stick around. So Quincy Rhodes Jr. is a guy that has 1st-round traits. I don't necessarily know if he's put out 1st-round tape. Maybe you can get him in the 2nd round because he hasn't necessarily put out 1st-round tape yet, but he has 1st-round traits and he's super built up. He's like 6'5", 275 or something like that. He's a junior, so he might not even come out this year, depending. Maybe he needs another year of development. But also, Arkansas just fired their coach. What else are you going to do? You're going to transfer to a different SEC program and prove it again? Like, you might, like, I think that there's a better chance now that he comes out than not. And I do think that he's, hovering in that top 50-ish range for me. Zion Young perfectly fits what the Chargers want to do in terms of like great, great, great run defender, has really taken a step forward against the pass this season. I think that he makes a lot of sense. David Bailey has really high run defense grades, despite being only like 240 pounds. He's played really well to start this season. Joshua Josephs, we talked about last week in the Trench episode. He's somebody that I think is playing himself into the top like 75-ish conversation. I think that he's fallen off a little bit since his like blazing start to the season. If he can regain that form, down the stretch in SEC play, I think that he's someone that could very easily catapult himself back into like the top 40 conversation. But like these are the types of guys where it's like super traitsy. They all fit what the Chargers want to do in terms of like they're very, very good run defenders. They're very, very like heavy bodies, with the exception of Bailey, who, like I said, is only 240. But like they are the body types that the Chargers like. There's a lot of edge rushers that are going to be grouped in that like back end of the first round, early second round kind of portion of the draft that the Chargers will be in. Because also, like, I think that there's a pretty good argument to be made that the Chargers trade down out of their first round pick now that they've traded away draft assets to get away, and they only have picks to begin with, right? Like, you want to accumulate some more picks because, as we've seen going through this episode, and I'm sure there's some other positions where you guys might have some thoughts about what the Chargers may need going forward, right? But as we go through this episode, right, we're talking about like 6 different positions that they have needs at, where it's like you need a guy in this spot to be ready 2 years from now, right? And in some of those places, you need multiple of those guys. On the offensive line, you need multiple of those guys, right? There's not enough picks to get that all done in one off season. So if you trade down, you're going to be in like the 40-ish range, right? Like trade down to the top of the second round. That's exactly where this like second, third tier of edge rusher is going to be in this draft class. And so, like I think again, right, like I think the most likely thing is that they just sign Odafe Owe to a contract extension, and it's not an issue for them. They don't need to take an edge this year. But in the case that they don't do that, I think that there is a case to be made that edge is still going to be a very big need for the Chargers, because if Owe leaves in free agency, the Chargers are right back where they started with the edge rusher position. And so it catapults right back up to the top of the list of their needs. All right. That is going to do it for today, guys. We're going to go about 10 minutes over. Again, I'm so sorry, Steven, but had a lot to say about this one. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I know it's a little bit different than like how we kind of traditionally do this show. But I figured with the trade happening, and like I said, some of you guys had asked me about it already. So just wanted to kind of go through like how I think the Chargers might attack this. It's October. We have 6 more months until the draft actually happens, but wanted to kind of give you guys an idea of like where I think the Chargers sit right now, where I think the board kind of sits for them right now. So I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if there are any players that like you guys are really huge fans of that I missed. If there's anybody that played really well last week that you think I should check out, or if you just think that there's some other positions that the Chargers may need in day 1, day 2 this upcoming draft. Would love to hear you guys' thoughts. If you want to follow the rest of my work, you can find me on Twitter over at Alex Katson, the same way you see it spelled on the screen. And until then, I will see you guys next week with another episode. Bolt up.